Chapter 13. Bermondsey, Leicester and East Dulwich. When I started work with IVS in 1971, we saw an advertisement for a tiny modern terraced house near the river in Bermondsey, southeast London. Edith and I bought it for £9,000. Here we adopted Tom in 1973, and Edith gave up teaching for a bit to become a full-time mother. She did not enjoy being shut in the house with the baby, and she'd go for long walks pushing a rather basic pram. When IVS moved to Leicester in 1976, we moved to a semi-detached house squashed next to a pub facing Victoria Park. Here we adopted Sally in 1977, and 2 years later we moved to a large rambling house with a colossal pear tree in the garden. Here we started to have friends living with us as lodgers, from Zambia, Tanzania and Uganda, and also Jagwant and Fo Chowdhury and their daughter Supriya after their return from India. Fo had been an IVS volunteer, and Jagwant worked for the Indian branch of SCI. Both joined our staff at the IVS office. When I was appointed at the Africa Centre in 1984, we bought a large Edwardian house in East Dulwich, jointly with Fo and Jagwant. It has a fantastic panoramic view over London and a good-sized garden. A few years later, Fo and Jagwant moved out, and their place has since been filled at different times by Solvig Starborg, a Swedish friend who was also a volunteer with SCI in India, and friends from Zambia, France, South Africa, Togo, Uganda, Nigeria and Ghana, some of whom came with the work camp movement. As I write, our oldest co-inhabitant, Ashong Anyate, has been with us for 20 years. We have two other Ghanaians, Paul and Eric, whose wife Marie is from Denmark, plus Supriya, who returned to live in London, and Keith Sheary from Zimbabwe, the expert on African cinema, my former colleague at the Africa Centre. I always liked living in a populated house, and I have appreciated it more since my very dear Edith died in 2011. Sally married Tim Brandon in 2000. They live nearby, and they have 3 brilliant children who seem to be destined for a stage career. Lucy, at the age of 11, was praised for her performance in Much Ado About Nothing at Shakespeare's Globe, and Toby, aged 9, is joining the West End cast of Matilda the musical. Tom is happily married to Cheryl, living in Scotland and feeling very Scottish. As a Watt, he had the right to a couple of clan tartans on his wedding, but we did not find the right one. I have an excuse for a good train ride to see him every few months. My crazy house also serves as the legal address of Books of Africa, and also Volunteer Action for Peace, of which I am currently chairperson. I also keep busy as chair of the Leggett Trust and North-South Travel, and as director of Just Ghana, a small company set up by the architect Elsie Owusu with the aim of capacity building and development, with an emphasis on the environment and climate justice. I'm also a member of the Quaker Congo Partnership and Fighting Poverty in Zambia. Edith was a great gardener, and I try and fail to keep the garden as she would have wished it to be. Heading Books of Africa. I never intended to go into publishing. In my youth, I had helped my mother by proofreading some of her books, and I followed with interest her experiences of good and bad publishers and their erratic payment of royalties. At the Africa Centre, we hosted Book Week Africa, as a result of which the African Books Collective was launched. Much later, when I was working in Paris, we met Dieudonné Namankou, who was writing up his research on Abraham Hannibal, the African ancestor of the great Russian poet Pushkin. Neither Edith nor I were aware of Pushkin's ancestry, but were fascinated by the story. Dieudonné's book was published by the venerable African publishing house Présence Africaine, and Edith translated it into English. At the time, Dieudonné found no publisher for the English version, and Edith died without seeing the book in print. Dieudonné later became a publisher himself, and in 2008 established Éditions Dagan in France. At this time, a friend of his, the Ivoirian Emmanuel Mar, was moving to London with the idea of starting an English-language cousin of Dagan. I got roped in, and Books of Africa was born. Having no capital and no premises apart from storage at my house, we've published several books each year and survived. I had been the literary executor of the Zimbabwean novelist Wilson Katiu, his well-known novel A Son of the Soil, and his posthumous novel Tsiga, which I edited. Other books came through our French connection, graphic biographies of the early life of two great African footballers, Samuel Eto'o and Didier Drogba, poetry by Gabriel Mwene Okunji from Congo-Brazzaville, and work by the pioneering Congolese author Kama Siwo Kamanda, hugely famous in the French-speaking world, but not among Anglophones. And of course, Abraham Hannibal, Prince of Logon, which finally appeared in 2015. Daniel, the son of the great New Orleans jazz pioneer Sidney Bechet, came to London to launch his book about his father and to celebrate the blue plaque on his house in London where he stayed in his youth. Our most popular titles have been the works of the American scholar Runoko Rashidi, who has studied the history of the black diaspora in Europe, Asia and the Americas. He has visited black communities all over the world and kept valuable photographic records, and he has come and given lectures a number of times in the UK.